Now that you understand what tempo and time signature is, we will look at the three different building blocks of music. Now, the three different building blocks of music are 1. Rhythm, 2. Harmony, and 3. Melody. So rhythm is percussive sounds. The relationship between different sounds in rhythm is time, not pitch, which means it is a relationship between two percussive, essentially drum sounds within a specific time frame. Harmony is when you play two or more notes, you could also call them pitches, at the same time, meaning the relationship between notes in harmony is vertical. And melody is when you play notes, musical notes, one after another, in succession of each other. And thus the relationship between the pitches in melody is horizontal. We're now going to look at how to construct the harmony and melody of a song by learning some advanced music theory. So in this section, we're going to cover intervals, keys, scales, and ideas for composing. Let me start off by explaining that there are 12 notes in Western music. Each one of these notes has a letter associated with it, and this is how we define what note we are playing. If we look at the piano keys, this is the note we call A. And if we play all of the white keys going upwards, these are the notes we would get. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then A would repeat because this A is the same note as this A, but an octave higher. The reason why this A has the same note value, but sounds higher in pitch, is because the frequency of this note is exactly double the frequency of the A an octave below. In musical terms, this is also known as an octave apart. So this note is essentially an octave below this one, and vice versa, this one is an octave above this one. The black keys also have the letters A through G assigned to them, but we use sharps and flats to describe them. So the black key above A can be known as either an A sharp or as a B flat, and it is written in this way. The name you use changes depending on the situation. I'll give you one more example. This black key is right in between the F and the G note, and it can be spoken as an F sharp or as a G flat. Now let me talk to you about half steps, whole steps, tones, and semitones. You should know that going up or down one key on the piano or any instrument is known as moving a half step or a semitone in traditional music theory terms. Going up or down two keys is known as moving a whole step or a tone. So for example, if we go from this key to this key, we have moved up by one semitone. If we go from this key to this key, we have moved down by a tone or a whole step. This is going to be useful information for when we look at how scales are constructed. In music, we tend to assign numbers to all of the notes we are using in order to make it easy for us to explain to other musicians and to ourselves what we are playing. But in order for these numbers to make sense, we have to have a starting point. And in order for this to make more sense to you, we're now going to look at scales. Let me explain first what scales are. Scales are a collection of notes which theoretically sound good when used to compose a piece of music. If you used any random notes to make up a melody or chord, it's likely that there wouldn't be any harmonic relationship between many of the notes that you've played, and thus it would be very difficult to compose a solid piece of music. Therefore, you can use scale formulas and the notes within them as a template to help create your chord progressions, melodies, and harmonies. and this will ensure that they all belong together and thus sound good in your song. Another way you can think of a scale is like this. Think of a scale as a set of notes, which you can draw from to write all of the music in your song. Meaning that most of the things you write for the song, such as your melodies and harmonies, will tend to come from this one scale that you chose. This way, it basically makes it easier for you to compose something that sounds good, because you're not going to be playing notes at complete random. You'll have a selection of notes which you can use, and that's it. The most common types of scales are known as diatonic scales. Diatonic scales are made up of 7 notes. However, there are many more types of scales which are made up of 5 notes, 8 notes, and even a scale known as the chromatic scale, which contains every one of the 12 notes available in Western music. The chromatic scale isn't really used to compose music because it would be similar to playing any random note, as mentioned above. Saying this, we are going to examine the intervals within the chromatic scale in order to help you understand why we assign numbers to all of the notes we are playing. First of all, a scale must have a root note. This is the note that the scale begins on, so essentially the first note of the scale. So if we started playing the chromatic scale in a sequential way, beginning on the A note, we could say that we are playing the A chromatic scale. However, if we began playing the scale on the C note, we would say that we are playing the C chromatic scale. As I already mentioned, the first note in the scale is known as the root note. The rest of the notes are also assigned numbers, but I just want to mention before I go through them that we actually call these scale degrees. So we wouldn't call the second scale a number, we would call it a specific scale degree. And I'm going to go through what these scale degrees are known as now. We're going to start playing the chromatic scale on the A note. So the A note is our root note. The second note, which is one semitone above, is the minor second. This is the scale degree it's known as, a minor second. The third note, which is a semitone above that, is known as the major second. The fourth note is known as the minor third. The fifth note is known as a major third. The sixth note is known as a perfect fourth. The seventh note is known as an augmented fourth. This can also be known as a diminished fifth because the next note, the eighth note, is known as a perfect fifth. The ninth note is known as a minor sixth. The 10th note, a major sixth. The 11th note, a minor seventh. The 12th note, a major seventh. And then the 13th note is our root note again. It's the A again, but an octave higher. So our scale would repeat from the 13th note onwards. Now, overall, you may have noticed that there are 4 major scale degrees, 4 minor scale degrees, 2 perfect scale degrees. However, I should mention that the octave is also known as a perfect scale degree, and so is the root note. So overall, there would be 4 perfect scale degrees and 1 augmented scale degree. This is going to be useful information for when we look at how diatonic scales, which are 7-note scales, are constructed. And this is because diatonic scales on every other scale is constructed by using scale degrees which exist within the chromatic scale. Now, I should also mention that scale degrees are also commonly spoken as intervals, meaning the word usually used for scale degrees is intervals. Now, the word interval, by definition, is the distance between 2 notes. For example, the 6th scale degree, which is 5 semitones above the root note in the chromatic scale, is also called a perfect 4th interval. So when I was going through all the scale degrees and I was saying the second note is a minor second scale degree, this can also be known as a minor second interval. Now soon we're going to go into how the diatonic scale is constructed and how you can use that to compose your music. But before we do that, I just want to talk about the tonal quality, the harmonic quality of the different scale degrees in the chromatic scale. Now, the root note, the perfect fourth, the perfect fifth, and the octave, so the root note and octave above, they all share a strong harmonic connection with the root note. And that's why these are known as perfect intervals. The minor intervals, the minor scale degrees, tend to produce a sad sound. And notice that they are one semitone below their major counterpart. And the major intervals are actually associated as happy sounding intervals. Quick fact, minor intervals are usually written with a lowercase m, major intervals are written with a uppercase m. Now the augmented/diminished interval tends to sound most dissonant as there is no harmonic relationship between the root note and an augmented fourth. Therefore, they are generally avoided and tend to not be used in most popular music, but they are still used in jazz, blues, classical, and many other genres. And of course, you can still use them in your own music. I'm just giving you the sort of commonly used fundamental music theory formulas. Now, as mentioned, all other scales in Western music are formulated using intervals which exist in the chromatic scale. The two most common scale formulas are the major scale formula and the natural minor scale formula. Let's start off with the major scale formula. The major scale is generally described as a happy sounding scale because it uses all possible major intervals and none of the minor intervals, whereas the natural minor scale is described as a sad or dark sounding scale because it substitutes all major intervals for their minor counterpart. Now they are both diatonic scales and they are made up of 7 notes. And the word diatonic in music just implies that this scale contains 7 notes. So whenever you read about diatonic scales, it means 7-note scales. Now, the formula of the major scale is the following. Root note, major second, major third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, major sixth, major seventh, and perfect octave. Now, the reason why this is called a formula is because let's say we started playing this scale on the note A again. Well, the first note would be the A. The major second would be a whole step above the root note. This means 2 semitones or 2 keys. The major third would be a whole step above the major second. The perfect fourth would be a half step above the major third. The perfect fifth would be a whole step again above the perfect fourth. The major sixth, a whole step above the perfect fifth. The major seventh, a whole step above the major sixth. And the perfect octave, a half step above the major seventh. Now we could take this exact distance between the notes starting from the root, apply it to any other note that in Western music on the keyboard, and we would be playing the major scale of that note. So if we started this formula in, let's say, the note C, we would be playing the C major scale. If we started in the note F, we would be playing the F major scale. In the note A, the A major scale. Now let me give you the formula for the natural minor scale. The natural minor scale contains the root note, and then instead of the major second, it's the minor second. Then instead of the major third, it's the minor third. Perfect fourth, perfect fifth, minor sixth, minor seventh, and then again the perfect octave back to the root note. As I said, the amazing thing about scale formulas is that once you learn the formula, you can apply it to any note and thus be able to play in any key you like. And remember that these formulas, you can use them to compose a piece of music. So you could take the A natural minor scale and you could use only the notes present in the A natural minor scale, and you'll be basically sure that no matter what you play, it's going to conform to a scale. This means it's going to sound harmonically pleasing to the ear. And you've got an endless amount of possibilities within these 7 notes. And we'll go through that in more detail when we look at how to compose melodies and harmonies later on in these tutorials. Now I just want to explain what key signature is quickly, because it is very related to scales. In case you're not sure what key signature is, keys and scales are connected. For example, if you compose a piece of music using the scale of A natural minor, we would say that the key of that piece of music is A minor. Thus we can say this track is in the key of A minor. So essentially, a key is how you define what scale a piece of music is written on. Armed with this information, a musician could quickly identify what scale was used to compose a piece of music. This can also be useful to DJs, because as we know so far, notes within a specific scale tend to sound good together. So if a DJ mixes 2 tracks which are in the same key, they would sound more harmonically pleasing compared to mixing tracks in different keys. And this is the technique known as harmonic mixing, which all the top DJs often use. Now we're going to go back to intervals and look at those in more detail. An interval, like I've said before, is the musical relationship between 2 notes. In other words, it defines the distance between 2 notes. See, when we're talking about scale degrees, we're talking about intervals relative to the root note of the scale. Therefore, the 7th scale degree in the chromatic scale can also be called an augmented 4th interval. The 3rd scale degree can be called a major 2nd interval, and so on. Let me give you another example. If we played the notes C and G together, it would be called a perfect 5th interval, because G is the perfect 5th above C. Let me give you another example. If we played the notes A and E together, it would be called a perfect 5th interval, because E is the perfect 5th above A. Finally, before we put all of this into practice and start composing a piece of music, you need to understand what chords are. Chords are what create the harmony in your song. Essentially, chords are multiple notes played at the same time which harmonize together. Chord progressions is a series of chords played within a specific time frame, and every single scale contains chords which would work within that scale because they are made up only of notes which exist within that scale. The most common chord type is called a triad. This is when you combine a note, we call this the root note, with a 3rd and the 5th intervals above the root note. Keep in mind that the 3rd and 5th intervals are relative to the root note of the chord, not the scale. Meaning that even if we're in the scale of A natural minor, we could play the D triad, and the root note within the chord would be the D, and we would play the major 3rd and the perfect 5th above the D. Now if you played, let's say, a minor 3rd, it would be known as a minor chord. But if you played the major 3rd, it would be known as a major chord. If you're not sure what I mean, go back and watch the section on the chromatic scale and scale degrees and look at specifically the minor 3rds and the major 3rd intervals, and hopefully you'll get a better understanding. So if we played, let's say A is our root note, we added the minor 3rd interval above the A and the perfect 5th, this would be known as a minor triad. If we played the A, the major third, and the perfect fifth, this would be known as a major triad. Therefore, if we decided to use the scale of A minor to compose our piece, then any chord that can be made up of only the white keys would be absolutely fine for us to use in our song. This is because the A natural minor scale contains all of the white piano notes, but none of the black notes. Therefore, it's also a good scale to learn composition on, because it's very easy to memorize being only the white keys. Overall, composing music requires a combination of harmony, melody, and rhythm. And I'm going to look at how to put all of these elements together to build a track now.